Looking at the schedule, term papers due next week on Monday. So you'll have a chance to ask questions about it on Thursday. I'm talking to JP after class today, but Thursday, office hours, please email me and let me know if you're coming to office hours so we could discuss this if you'd like. So between 10 and 11 in ARDX 170, I'm there. And if that doesn't work for you, I can briefly chat with you after class, not today, but on Thursday. You can ask questions in class on Thursday because that's more important than what we're studying. So that's it. The final exam is on December 21st, 10:30 to 12:30 here. So that's that, and we'll be reviewing on December 12th and or 14th about that. Okay? Questions, anybody?
What was the time again for the final exam?
10:30 to 12:30 on 12/21. Okay, the topic for this week is social science research into electronic media. So this should be distinguished from ratings research, which is what the industry does in order to understand how many people are watching and what the demographic characteristics of the audience are. In this case, this is typically academic or more rarely nowadays industry research into you could call it the social effects of electronic media. Like early on, I think the industry funded a lot of this. The Army funded a good deal of it as well. But as we've moved forward more and more, it's the realm of academic PhD programs and stuff. So there's quite a big difference between ratings research and social science research into media and electronic media. So first off, something that all of these approaches share is a theory. Who could take a stab at defining what a theory is? What's a theory? Or what's a theory for? Yes?
Isn't it like a statement that's been tested over and over again?
Good point.
It's like a hypothesis or something?
Hypothesis is part of it, yeah, part of it. Any others? It's a good start, definitely. Right, so a thesis is a statement, a thesis. A theory, statement, and just broadly tries to explain something. So it's a statement that tries to explain something, right? In our case, we might have a theory about how the media influence individuals. That could be typically something like that. Now, what JP's talking about also is theories can be caught up in the protocols of scientific research which try to test theory. So not all theories are designed to be tested. A good theory doesn't necessarily have to be testable. But if you're working in the social sciences, you're going to spend time trying to either work only with theories which can be tested or figure out ways that your theory could be tested. And a hypothesis is part of this. So a hypothesis is basically a guess
But don't they try
to explain
push
something.
Don't they try to push a theory and push a theory and push a theory even though it might never happen?
You mean it might not be possible to disprove or prove it?
Yeah.
Sometimes, yes. Depends on who we're talking about. Those theories which are sort of that you're not able to prove or disprove, those ones tend to stick around forever. Marxism, for instance, is, some of the theories associated with that are not really provable, but they, so that gives them, they can stay around for longer. Versus, In social sciences, what I was going to say is it differs a little bit between social sciences and physical sciences in that the social sciences deal with human beings, with individuals, with social groups, with society at large. Those are at least 3 levels of social phenomena, and they're very complex. People are very complex. Whereas one might be able to craft a very elegant theory about how a particular drug works on somebody's body and come up with ways to test that, and hypothesis, which, as I said, it's a guess about why something happens, and then you can do a test which could confirm or refute a hypothesis, and at that point the hypothesis would be revised or maybe changed, maybe tossed out. Sometimes research on a particular topic grinds to a halt because you find out it doesn't turn out to be testable. So even in the physical sciences where this type of hypothetico-deductive process works better, as I said as an example, like let's see if this drug actually makes your heart rate go down or something like that. So we can measure your heart rate, we can give you the drug, we can make sure it goes down, we can have a test group who gets a fake drug, we can compare. None of that can happen in social science research. You can't have that type of confirmation. So instead, the theories that we use tend to be more and more complex as we go through the history of it, but very difficult to disprove. Typically what happens is we'll figure out, well, we really can't say that we thought. So we'll have a hypothesis. For instance, watching a violent video game will make people violent or something like that. Seems to be like a common sense hypothesis, right? When you try to actually put it into a pseudoscientific protocol and test that, it becomes too complex to test. You'll get contradictory results, right? Because another thing about science is that if your research into your heart drug is reliable, you should be able to repeat it over and over again, right? Social science, research doesn't often lead to the ability to reproduce the results over and over again. You simply have to accept that that's the type of research that it is. So you could also simply, since none of us are professionally involved in social science research, we could simply look at it as a set of interesting ideas, hypotheses, that people have gone and tried to work on. So it wasn't just, hey, I think it could be this, and that's my opinion, so that's it, I believe it, hey? They did at least try to work out, is this really happening? How could we find out more? And that kind of stuff. So you look at it as questions that were raised about the electronic media, and people did their best to study and find out whether their thoughts, their hypotheses, were actually valid. But they ran quickly into limits based on the complexity of the problem and perhaps the general difficulty of doing research on social groups, individuals, and society at large, right? Because mass media have presumable societal effects. They change the way that information flows through society. So at least we know that we are dealing with theories, but unlike the kind of research that would prove or disprove the usefulness of a drug, we've never managed to get that kind of confirmation about media. But we certainly tried. So the textbook breaks down the history of research into strong effects, limited effects, and moderate effects. Basically, as people got further into the issue, they kind of rolled back their expectations and their hypotheses about what electronic media actually do. Early in the day, some of the first media research that was concerned with media effects have now disparagingly been called the magic bullet theory. Nobody working at the time said, I've got a theory of media, it's a magic bullet. But in laughing about it after the fact, people have now come to call it the magic bullet theory, or the hypodermic needle, the idea that a media message could be injected into the brain of somebody, I guess, and influence them directly, is what the textbook author calls a strong effect. I see the advertisement, bzzz, it burns into my brain, and I go and buy the product, right? Or, you know, I read the tweet and bzzz, I go out and start, you know, beating people up or something like that. And that largely has been viewed now as, you know, a hypothesis that posits too strong a media effect. Why? Because we may all have seen the same advertisements, and yet we haven't all gone out and bought those products that were advertised. So we know even from our personal experience that although we are exposed to particular messages, they don't always affect us with a nice clean causality. Saw the message, bought the product. Although I think the advertising agencies would love to, you know, to believe that, to assert that, would love it if their clients believed it. Doesn't happen. Obviously around us, we can sit here, see the same messages, and come away with different responses. You know, so this idea of an all-powerful media was left aside as people thought more about it and said, it sounded good, and it sounds scary, and it makes the media sound really powerful and cool. However, when you really look at it, it doesn't always happen. This direct causal influence of a media message which produces a behavior. Right? So that was the magic bullet theory. And this came about in the 1920s, and some have credited the beginnings of interest in electronic media due to propaganda that was very influential in the First World War. So that was the first war where radio was used as, you know, a point-to-point communication device, allowing the coordination of troops and such. But they were also quite aware that this could be a powerful propaganda tool in the hands of others. In your own hands, you would call it a persuasive tool, right? Because you had the truth and you were persuading your troops that we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, you should kill the good guys, right? It's propaganda when it's the other side, which is broadcasting to you saying, oh, you guys, you should all go home and give up. You're going to lose anyway, and your wives are having sex with all those guys who didn't bother to enlist, and, you know, all those kinds of messages, right? Yeah. So in our textbook, I mean, there are multiple definitions for propaganda, but our textbook defines propaganda as information that is of greater benefit to the persuader than it is to the audience who gets it. In the sense that if you're of the troops in the First World War and somebody, you know, sets up a loudspeaker on their side of the lines and gets somebody, you know, playing music and telling you bad stories about what's going on at home or something, you know, that's of greater benefit to them if they manage to discourage you than it is to you. However, the same types of messaging could also be viewed as persuasion if it's on your side, where the greater benefit is to go to the receiver. Of course, you know, if you're the troops and it's your own group of people that are coming through and entertaining you and making you feel patriotic and making you feel like all this horrible stuff you're living through is worth it, then that's apparently of more benefit to you, the receiver. So that's how the textbook tries to wade through the many different definitions of propaganda. But just when the word propaganda comes to mind, what pops up in your head? I'm sure it wasn't of greater benefit to the persuader or whatever. What's an easier way of thinking about propaganda?
North Korea.
Pardon me? North Korea, and what aspect of it? Well, let's go with Jenny. She started, yes.
The Dear Leader. I remember in a news segment where they managed to sneak in a journalist crew and video camera under the guise of I don't know, under some guise. And one of the things that they did capture was a family. Their routine is literally to gather everybody in the living room and bow to a picture of dear leader every morning.
Wow. Okay, okay. So from the administration's point of view, that's of great benefit to the receiver. They should know who's in charge and they should love their dear leader. To us looking on from outside, we look at that and say, you know, that's just keeping people ideologically in line with, you know, their dictator, basically, right? Yeah. And did anyone, that's a terrific example, by the way. Did anyone have, JP, you were starting to talk?
That was like what I was gonna say. Like you're supposed to like, they're persuading you to support the leader or country during.
Got you.
war.
Got you. Yes, during a war. Especially during war. I think that, you know, that was where the term was coined afterwards, the idea that it was to happening during wartime. But we've extended this notion of propaganda outside of that to, you know, I think we use it to talk about politically persuasive messaging on behalf of, you know, usually it's the other guy, right? I have an older example, which is pretty creepy, that, you know, it's time for some video anyway. So let's look at a little Nazi television. This isn't long, but watch the subtitles. It's a little bit, first of all, it's as anti-Semitic as you would believe it is. So trigger alert there. But yeah, this is just 3 minutes. So this is from the late 30s.
Achtung, Achtung! Fernsehsender Paul Nipkow. Wir begrüßen alle Volksgenossen und Volksgenossinnen in den Fernsehstuben Groß-Berlins mit dem deutschen Gruß Heil Hitler.
Wir möchten Ihnen jetzt mal den Beweis erbringen, dass nicht nur Cowboys mit dem Lasso umgehen können, nein, auch Tänzerinnen. Also eine Lasso-Stepptänzerin, die vor einiger Zeit im Wintergarten in Berlin gastierte.
Maximum entertainment is the recipe cooked up by the post office, which was responsible for attracting viewers to the television parlors.
Um mal wieder über die Musik zu sprechen. Ich freue mich eigentlich, dass es heute alles so wunderbar im Takt geht, nicht wahr? Wenn es auch hier und da immer noch so etliche Querpfeifer bei uns gibt. Und vielleicht auch mal solche, die gerne mal wieder die Zentrummel rühren möchten. Sogenannte Devisenmusikanten, nicht wahr? Auch da machen wir wenig Federlesen. Die kommen zu ihrer weiteren Ausbildung in ein Konzertlager, wo man ihnen dann so lange die Flötentöne beibringt, wie sie sich an eine taktvolle Mitarbeit gewöhnt haben.
Beiträge.
Only very few recordings of such programs have survived. Among them, a film version of one
Okay,
of
did you catch what he just said?
written and produced for the new mediums.
You did? Yeah, yes.
Yeah, he was saying that musicians go to sing for their food so that they can be better as musicians.
Right, the foreign exchange musicians, right, who are sent to concert camps. Right, concert camps.
That's kind of
Right? So, I mean, you know, there's some debate as to how much of the population knew what was going on with the final solution and, you know, the deportation of the Jews and the camps and stuff. And to be fair, they also, I mean, to be fair, whatever, he may be referring to gypsy musicians as well. The Roma were across Europe and they were persecuted by everybody, not just Nazis. And they were rounded up and removed as well. But, you know, the whole kind of internal ethnic cleansing they were going on was like right out there, wide open on television, and we were going to entertain you and make you feel, you know, this is all the fun, but we'll also get in there and talk in thinly veiled metaphors about, you know, what was being done to the population at the time, you know, so leading up to the Second World War. So there's, you know, that I think that could legitimately be called propaganda as well, even though they technically weren't at war, but they were certainly conditioning their population to, you know, to their rule and to see things their way. And you know, this obviously that film footage was captured. The way it worked there, Jenny, I was reminded of this because, there weren't a lot of TVs at the time, right? Our American television was not released until the World's Fair 3 years later. The Germans had a system, but they didn't have enough, or they didn't put them into individuals' homes. They put them in TV parlors, like rooms off of bars and places like that, where neighborhood people would be pressured into attending to see, just not only entertainment, but the messages from the Nazi leaders, And so it was kind of like a forced sort of communal thing where you had to go through it. You would be alongside everybody else doing the salute and everything like that. And it was a way of bringing their kind of political messaging down to like neighborhood levels and forcing people, you do it in front of everybody else. It's like, that's pretty insidious. Yeah. And of course some of the late 30s, early 40s media research was actually done by German exiles because many Jews fled the country. A lot of them were intellectuals, and some very serious intellectuals wound up in New York City doing research for CBS and others. Clearly, coming out of the terror, it's like, wow, we've got these incredible tools. What should we do with them? Well, let's start, putting that kind of filth into people's heads, basically. Say it that way. So people who fled that, were pretty dedicated to coming over here and raising the alarm. It's like, whoa, American entertainment media, fantastic, but tweak it just a little bit, and you've got, a direct conduit for, authoritarian hate, which is what they ran away from. So there's an interesting history behind that. In fact, these more sophisticated models, right? Remember, why am I saying it was simplistic? Well, the hypodermic needle model was pretty simplistic, and early theories of propaganda, basically thought, well, the messaging will get the people together, will broadcast the dear leader's message, and they will be good programmed subjects. And if they're not, we'll just bombard them with more of those messages. And if we hear them say anything contrary, we'll arrest them and put them into a concert camp or something like that. Very effective in that type of society. When people like Lazarsfeld, who fled Nazi Germany, came over here, they were in a democracy, thank goodness. And there was, an electronic media every bit as powerful, but now far more commercially controlled, not centrally controlled by the government as many European broadcasting systems were. So they're in a democracy. You can't count on forced bombardment with messages or with, accompanying strong-arm tactics on the population. Instead, they become more interested in how a media message carries and is influential, but they no longer think, well, the hypodermic needle or the magic bullet, it hits you, you'll believe. They say, oh, it's more complicated than that. It's what they called a two-step flow. So the first thing to do is, the media broadcast messages. The messages go out to the population at large, but they thought of a kind of an intermediary group of people, the opinion leaders, who would pick up the messages and then carry that message into their communities where they were influential people, right? And so then the opinion followers would follow on with the opinion leaders. So that's what they called a two-step flow, because step one, from the antenna to the opinion leader, step two, from the opinion leader out to everybody that they know. Can you think in current media of any type of two-step flow that you might see, maybe in politics, maybe in commercial, in promotional media? Yeah, John?
Conan, I watch Conan a lot, and he does a segment called The Clueless Gamer, where he previews upcoming or about to be released video games on behalf of the video game companies. So it's like the video game companies are using him as an opinion leader. And
Gotcha.
Lots of people watch the show. Some people look up that segment online just because they like video games. And
Interesting. I'm surprised by that one. That's definitely. That makes me think of Oprah's book club, which at the time used to be able to create instant bestsellers, right? Just based on you get your.
Still going on.
Is it really? Yeah. Oh, okay. I mean, since she got her channel, I basically, or her network, right? Her cable network, I basically paid no more attention. But okay, how about in social media? Any signs of opinion leaders and opinion followers in social media? Yeah, JP?
Like celebrities, like I would think like grassroots groups or activists would have opinion leaders like celebrities.
Possibly,
Talk
yeah.
About like how, like for example, like Lele Pons and Cardi B, not Cardi B, just Lele Pons, the Vine star. She talked about how Puerto Rico needs help, and that's not just a territory.
Yeah, that would sound to me like a celebrity opinion leader, definitely. In another type of media theory, well, we also talk about social change. There are theories of social change, of course, and the idea that in democracies that there is a key role for people who aren't in government but who do manage to coalesce a group of supporters around them. That would also come under that. So that's interesting. Now, as to who you mentioned on Vine and everything like that, I'm clueless, of course, but the general idea, I think you got something for sure. Jenny?
Stephen Colbert.
Colbert, as a celebrity and influential thought-wise, do you feel, who's he gathering lately? Who's he influencing lately?
Everybody who is not a Trump fan.
Right. Oh, sorry, I touched my mic. So I hear his ratings are doing great now that he's more critical of Trump. Yeah. Okay. Possibly. And Tony?
I've been watching a lot of documentaries on like Scientology, and they kind of they make a lot of propaganda, and they harness kind of like Tom Cruise as kind of like their opinion leader.
Okay.
Draw people in, like, you believe in this, like you can achieve fame and success, like.
That's okay. That's really interesting. I'm not contradicting you, but I'm thinking, how often do I hear Tom Cruise actually proselytizing for them, rather than I hear, oh, Tom Cruise is a Scientologist? I don't know. Has he ever publicly supported the group? Or?
Well, I think they kind of do that more.
I think they probably target celebrities as as part of their influence operations, propaganda. Call it that. I mean, again, we keep on extending the notion of propaganda, but it is, it's definitely more beneficial to the Scientologists if people believe that than I think it is to, well, again, if you're within the cult, I guess you see it differently. But yeah, okay, cool. I was thinking that my other generic example is just how if a company wants to promote a product, you now have a choice, as we were talking a couple of weeks back. You could buy a $1 million ad on the Super Bowl, and it looks great. It's a display ad, but the new up and coming thing is rather, why don't you put your product in the hands of 100 people who have 1,000 followers on YouTube or on Facebook or something like. Just give it to them, and if you like it, just talk about it. And they start talking about it, and rather like the two-step flow. The opinion leaders are influential. I think, online advertising of that sort is leveraging the social bonds between influential people, be they celebrities or be they just your friends, right? What was that? Are they still doing that on Amazon, where if you buy, I bought a can of tuna fish and I have the option of sharing with all my friends on Facebook. Do they still do that? For a while they had a link going there. Right? So you buy a diamond ring for your sweetie, and it'll instantly be fed to everybody in your news feed, right? They were making that possible. Why? Well, the idea is that your friends trust you, right? Their friends, they see 1,000 advertisements. Why should they care? But if they find out that you bought that new game, and they know that you're totally into games, and they know they like your taste, maybe they'll buy a game like that too. So that's the idea, that you too can become an opinion leader, celebrity or not, within your trusted circle of friends. If you say something's good, it's just like, they met you at a coffee shop and said, hey, I just bought this widget, man, check it out. So that's what's happening right now too. Olive?
There's I don't know if you've heard of him, Anthony Bourdain.
Hmm?
He's a big traveler and stuff. And
Traveler chef guy, right?
Yeah, as well. And went to London. And I went to London last year. I heard that he went to a certain restaurant. I went there because I heard he went there.
Was it as good as he said it was?
Yeah, but I heard he tweeted it and stuff, and that's a good example of like hashtag whatever restaurant he went to, and that's a good example of an opinion leader
Right.
as well. We follow him, and it's like an ongoing thing
Right.
as well.
Right. So had you seen an ad for that restaurant, it probably wouldn't have stood out from any other restaurant. But if Bourdain, who you trust, as he's an opinion leader, then you'll check it out. Yeah, for sure. It's a great example again.
It happens often on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I think even with Facebook, like, it's right. Your friends, you share with your friends, comes from a trusted source. And even sometimes when my friends are like, oh, hey, I like that. I mean, there's someone who lives really far away. I'm like, well, why is she saying, and it isn't that she's going to come to San Francisco and attend this particular event or whatever the activity is, but she's feeling it because, wow, Tony said that's cool.
Yeah.
And so I see that how.
I remember I had a great time with Tony back in the day, so something she thinks cool, I'll think is cool, and there you go. You're selling for them, and all you did was express, your like for something, but that's part of the two-step flow, I think, that it still makes sense. It still makes a lot of sense. Yeah?
That kind of happens a lot in the music industry too. When I think about it, so there's a lot of really prominent musicians where if people will follow the band and they play instruments themselves, a lot of companies will tend to endorse those musicians if they get big enough. So if a band is popular enough, like a company will say, okay, well, we're going to release a guitar line for you. And another company is going to say, okay, well, you're going to use our guitar strings and our guitar, and different companies saying we're going to send you guitar picks, and then they're going to post all these videos online of them, playing these products or using other kinds of gear. And then people will be like, oh, I'm going to start using this gear because A, it sounds good, or I like this musician enough to want to go out and buy this brand of guitar they're playing or whatever, drum, bass, etc. effects, and then it just kind of spreads from there. And then even if say a company or when different musicians use products of the same company, say like a specific guitar amp or something, then that'll incite people to go out and get that specific product a lot more because they see a lot of people using the same product.
Gotcha.
So.
Okay. Yeah, another good example. So many anecdotes which are getting us to realize, there's something here to the two-step flow. And whereas the hypodermic needle, it depends on the the magic bullet kind of collapsed when people started just looking around them and saying, well, not everybody buys the thing. The two-step flow led to a better outcome in terms of testing, seeing, okay, what is going to be influential. And the early research in here was actually political research, which was conducted, some of this has lasted over 20 years. And so they had very big longitudinal studies which did show a much better incidence of being able to persuade people of certain things if it ran through opinion leaders than simply if the campaign was just from the media to the individual. So definitely something involved here, and we all now are coming up with lots of great examples about it. Another limited effect, they say. So why do they say it's limited? Well, they say the media message has an effect, but it's limited. What we have to consider is also the work of opinion leaders, so kind of the social grease which allows the message to flow. So the message itself has a limited effect. Only in conjunction with opinion leaders do we see, kind of a positive result of this. That's why this, the whole slide here is on limited effects. More research was done in the Second World War on troops because you had there a captive research pool. These were GIs and they would do what they told you to do. Thank goodness these ones weren't told to go walk into a nuclear bomb blast an hour after it happened or something. They were actually shown a whole bunch of films, propaganda films, And they were tested to see how their opinions evolved as they were exposed to these messages. And some very big name Hollywood directors were involved because they wanted to contribute to the war effort, they were patriotic, etc. They turned their skills towards creating propaganda films, some for broad release, but many of them just for the army, which were as how would I put it? As psychologically targeted as possible towards seeing if they could promote more aggressive feeling among soldiers, if they could also measure like insecurity, if they could diminish people's fears through media, basically. And as part of this, which again was conducted on huge populations, which would cost a fortune to do in the commercial world, but in the Army, you've got these folks helping you. So what they found that the success of a media message was also going to be determined by some characteristics of the audience, of the listener, in fact. Thereby, people have a pre-existing cognition. They have tendencies, they know stuff already. Nobody is a blank slate on which the magic bullet, collides. You already come with existing opinions and with intelligence, and this tried to count that in. How could we forget that before, right? So people of a particular state, a particular set of beliefs will be selective about what messages they expose themselves to. In other words, given a choice, they will watch stuff that they believe in and avoid stuff that they don't believe in prior, right? So that makes it difficult to come to somebody with something new that they disagree with. They will avoid it. Selective perception, measured by thousands of people watching these movies, they will see things, they will perceive stuff that they are primed to perceive already by their pre-existing points of view. They will not even see things that other people see in the ads that have a different cognition when they come in. In other words, you perceive what it is you expect to see, what it is you want to see, and you're much less good at perceiving stuff that you don't agree with or don't want to see. It's just like, that doesn't make sense to me. Selective retention. When they test you afterwards, they find out you tend to remember stuff that agrees with what you agreed with already and forget all that other complicated stuff which doesn't confirm what you believed in already. This is like tested out and pretty reliable, and not all this stuff is, but that is. Jenny?
All of that sounds summed up in one word of prejudice.
Or bias. That's another common word now that like all the kids are being told to, understand your bias or something like that. Yeah, but these were psychologists, and so they didn't want to reduce things to one term. They wanted to create like dozens of terms in order to, kind of analyze stuff or whatever. So they kind of broke it down into, different things that they could test. If we give people the choice between this show and this show, what will they watch? If we give people, if we show them stuff, what will they actually look at in it? So can you come up with any, does this type of selective cognition can you see how this influences any of our current media habits and discussions that we're having out there? As I was rattling on there, you must have been thinking, yeah, John?
Yeah, you pick who you follow on Twitter.
Yeah.
Most social media. So you, in essence, pick who you want to get your information from, or get your worldview from.
And you probably won't pick someone who challenges your own pre-existing worldview, right? Maybe you might if you're like someone who likes a little bit of controversy. But you're more likely to follow someone who sees things the way you do. Yeah. How about in other media? How about in news media? Yeah, Jenny?
Fox versus CNN?
Yeah, I guess so. That sorts audiences out pretty well based on their prior opinions about things, right? And If you look at the findings here, which have been proved over and over again that people engage in this, what does this say about the potential or possibility for seeing things from another point of view, reaching across the aisle, or so on and so forth? What? Richard's shaking his head.
Yeah, I think it's creating more distance than whatever we have right now.
Got you. Yeah. There seems to be a natural psychological tendency to selectively engage with that which you believe in already. So it becomes that much harder to move into some area that you're not already in agreement with.
There's always going to be a problem.
Sorry?
There's always going to be a problem.
Always a problem? Not if they agree with what I agree with already. Then we're fine, right?
Well, I disagree.
You disagree? Okay. And? I'm not quite following you now.
Do you want to follow me?
Yes, because I'm a teacher. Because I think we can all, as let me put it. I mean, it's funny. It is fun, but you come to school in order to think outside of the boundaries, and I'm always kind of disappointed when I come to school and find closed minds, because we should be able to think openly about this stuff. So part of the message here, I think, is if we manage to think critically about our own positions, and then I think we can, we're not slaves to this. We can decide, hey, I'm going to go read InfoWars for a month, and maybe you'll gain further insight. You may not agree with it all at the end, but you'll gain further insight. You don't have to tune them out because you don't agree with them. And you may even find eventually, maybe not on InfoWars, but areas in which your opinions evolve. But I would just hate to, although this is a tendency, I think thinking critically about stuff and being smart about it can lead you out of these pitfalls. Or being open-minded. Open-minded, yeah, that's another word for what I'm talking about. Or mindful, it's like, why am I getting off so much on this set of tweets, Think about it then. It's like, okay, getting off is fun, it feels good to be so emotional about stuff. But then later on, it's like, was that a good thing to do? Or did that lead you to the most intelligent thought? Richard. Yeah.
I mean, if this process can choose the President of the United States, help choose the President of the United States, I mean, I don't think we can avoid this.
Yeah.
At any point, because this is happening regardless of what we say or what we do.
Yeah.
Then after we leave this class, we tend to follow whoever we like. Anyways, when we're not, the concept of debating over a rational topic it's not there no more.
Well, that's a great point, and I'm reminded again at the beginning of our lecture, I tried to distinguish between different levels in which this kind of research would operate, both at the individual, I said the small group, and I said the societal. And I think what Richard's talking about here is definitely a problem on the level of the societal. How do you, by societal, I mean more than just small groups who are face-to-face together. We're talking about, an electoral system which binds up hundreds of millions of people who get to choose eventually who the president is and such. And it does become extraordinarily complex, of course. But, I think there would be interesting speculative hypothetical stuff that could never be proven or disproven. But to think about, okay, if we as individuals have these tendencies, what are the media techniques that were used and are still used in order to heighten these divisions, to make people, so much less likely to step outside of their silo and give some other point of view a shot, And I think, my own hypothesis, I'd love to hear what you think, is by continually riling people up, by stoking them emotionally, by making them angry, by confusing them and making them, frustrated, and also by, amplifying and caricaturing the positions that you don't already hold, I think you get people to double down on this tendency. I think that might be, it's either a hypothesis or maybe it's just an idea that we have which makes it seem that much more important about why the Russian interventions, why Russians, hiring activists to get out there and be particularly aggressive about stuff, why, placing ads that, kind of mimic left-wing stuff, but make it even more kind of over the top. What kind of strategy might be going on there, I guess. Jenny, ideas?
It was broadcasted that Fox blocked billionaire Tom Steyer, who is a very big supporter of the Democrat. They blocked his ad. I don't know whether they refunded his money, but his ad to constantly campaign to impeach Trump. Yet on many of the other networks, including Cron 4, it plays regularly.
Interesting. So that's the gatekeeper actually, dropping the gate. We're not going to put that type of message out, even if you pay for it. We won't put that message out on our channel. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So Richard. More?
I feel like the reason why this is because each and every one of us are in our own bubble, and whatever we like or whatever we share or whatever is within our bubble. And there's this, as you say, this advertising agency group, they target this bubble, just the bubble, and they lead whatever they want. Like suppose I like CNN, right? And then I've liked CNN's post, so they feed me CNN's post. Literally, they feed me almost every time, and then that way I lean towards CNN a little bit more, even though if I don't want to, I just do it because I'm constantly on my phone. I just see it for even if it's for 2 seconds, it still stays in my mind. So it goes for whatever there is, Amazon Prime or Foxes or whatever, and I feel like people who are in their bubble just go around and around over the same thing, and this helps create their mentality that way, so that they lean towards that thing. Because to be fact, people don't socialize no more, personally, face-to-face, rational debate doesn't happen unless you're drunk at a bar. To be honest.
Now you're being provocative like Olive. You guys are playing with the truth. No, got you.
So people, I feel like that's the reason why they feel, because if you check on it, you'll find bubbles, small bubbles, CNN bubbles living at a certain area of the internet, and small bubbles of Fox News living at a certain area of the internet,
right.
which they feed simultaneously from me.
Got you. It's the bubble theory of selective processing. Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of it could be, you're updating and thinking about this type of effect in our current situation. Yeah, definitely. And I think there's something to be said also about the technology. As you were saying, your news feed kind of is in a feedback loop. The more you like CNN stuff, the more they serve you CNN stuff. And so you'll gradually, get into a loop. It's your bubble, right? No, it's not. I mean, Google, the search algorithm does it too, right?
Then there's some other person somewhere on the world talking about person, they'll feed me, well, you might like this. How about you try this?
Right.
I click on it, I was like, okay. And then they feed something, well, how about this? And then it goes on. And
absolutely.
It doesn't give us the other picture.
Well, your search results are, skewed based on your history of consumption as well. So somebody entering the same search terms who doesn't have your profile will get different results back. So, even in search where we're not at all expecting that type of feedback loop to happen, it's happening too. So, these are, I got to share with you, I heard there was a Google employee who somehow became a kind of an ethicist of this particular thing that we're talking about. I heard a great interview with him. Did anyone? This is not ringing a bell for anybody, but I'll look up his name, because what he was saying was just making a lot of sense. It's like, clearly this is really influential stuff. We don't know exactly how influential, because it's really hard to study this thing, but just based on our intuition that, that people are getting more and more divided and into their selective processes, should companies, who are basically running this, right? We are prisoners of the Facebook algorithm or the Google algorithm on this issue, should they actually do some kind of ethical reflection on it and say, well, maybe it's, although it makes people want to use our service more, Fox has the greatest news ratings, right? So it makes more money for us, but maybe we should step back a little bit from these things that we suspect are producing this. I'm not sure, and I don't think they would even do it, but it's a good thing to wonder about, sure. So notice we started with the strong effect, which was the message just programs you, to now limited effects, where the message requires trusted people to deliver it as well as being out there. And in this case, the message is going to have a harder time if it contradicts previously held points of view and such. Now we get into moderate effects, which become, now the whole thing is kind of fragmenting, the little story that we're trying to tell here. As we're getting into the 1960s, and we're getting into academic research rather than, the stuff we were talking about before was for the government, was for the army, and there was industry research too, sometimes the same people, and it was political research, it's like the advanced type of thing that, goes on now. That was the precursors of it. So those things were, those big institutions were doing it. Now we get into more very specific questions that academics are asking. A continuing thing that people have been looking at is violence on TV. And we'll talk about the contemporary points of view on it next class. But even in the 1960s, people were concerned about, the impacts of violent TV, violent news content, in part because, think about it, TV becomes the dominant medium in the 1950s. And so it's really within 10 years that you've got people starting to, think, is there a downside to this medium? Now we're all thinking about being addicted to our phones and being constantly interrupted. And we're starting to think through, like, is there a downside to having a tiny, portable, multimedia communication device with us all the time? We're starting to think about that, right? Well, back in those days, within about 10 years of getting TV, people were thinking, is this really good, like what we're seeing here? There's a murder every day, and how many dozens of murders are kids exposed to on television? Should we watch out for that? And so, the regulators were getting involved, but also people who were doing media research were getting involved. Bandura, I think he was local, I think it was a Stanford thing, was looking at how children, a lot of people have been concerned for children around this too, especially early on. The Bobo doll experiments. So I had a Bobo doll when I was growing up. It was like this inflatable plastic thing with a weight in the bottom, and you would punch it and it would like fall down and then come back up and stuff. Oh, yeah. You guys ever have a Bobo doll? Yeah, Tony did. Anyhow, we should still need Bobo dolls. So kids would watch videos of other kids punching the Bobo doll, and then they would like see, did the ones that saw the videos of punching Bobo dolls punch their Bobo doll more afterwards? And they did. So there was some kind of positive outcome here. And Bandura, adapting existing psychological theory, the idea that little kids model the behaviors that they see. And, if you have little kids, it's just, it's kind of irrefutable. It's like there's things going on at home, and all of a sudden they're imitating them. And so, yeah, Bandura was able to show that some kind of direct correlation in little kids anyway, that they would model their behavior, aggressive behavior, on what they saw otherwise. Now, again, what we have there is a huge question about violence in the media and its effects that it might have. And what we have is like a very narrow slice, well, amongst these kids, when we showed them these videos, there was, they did mimic the behavior. Had they showed videos about sharing your, snack with other kids, possibly the kids would have shared their snacks. I don't know, but they were concerned with violence. That's what they were. you know, in a way, it points to something that a lot of people who are critical of media research are concerned with too. It's like you wind up studying only the things that at the time you think are the most important. You know, if your anxieties about media come down to what are we doing to the kids? What is this doing to the kids? You're going to set out and study only the things that, you know, you're most freaking out about. Nothing says that those are the most influential or, in the long term, the most important things about media, right? We may be missing the effects that we should really study, but we tend to study the things which are, you know, scaring us the most. Propaganda, you know, people may be susceptible to the enemy, or, you know, violence on TV, and of course, every time, you know, violence erupts, and then it's like we want to explain it. It feels so bad. Another mass shooting. You know, the gun lobby has effectively stymied every attempt to you know, control it that way. So then you start looking around. Well, did they watch a lot of video games when they were growing up? You know, or that kind of thing. So it's like, anyway, there's been a lot more research into that we can talk about next class. None of it is definitive as sitting back and saying, of course, you know, they watched a lot of, you know, violent stuff, so they're going to be violent. But it turns out when you test it out, that's not the case. So, or it turns out to be very difficult to get a kind of a positive result out of it. So anyway, we'll see more about that. But the history of all this and the textbook chapter leads us to powerful effects regarding content, which we may have discussed a little bit earlier. We're kind of blanking on whether this came up when we talked about radio, for instance, or... Well, yeah, after the Bandura tests, there was the Surgeon General conducted some research on groups of children, again, having them view TV violence, and then going out and testing the changed attitudes that they may have had towards the violence. They found a strong link, but since then, this being science, you know, things are always open to revision, right? Since they found a strong link, some questions have arisen as to, you know, whether, okay, you sit a bunch of kids down, you show them some violent, you know, animations or something like that, and later on you test them, you put them in particular situations where they may have an aggressive response or they may not. The only problem with this is, were the individuals, before they saw those videos, did they have a tendency to that type of aggressive response? Because human beings, you know, there's a range. Some people are more aggressive than others. Some people, you know, it's like, speaking of the tweeter in chief, you know, it's like some people are just like extremely aggressive, some people are not. And those types of pre-existing, you know, conditions, personalities and such, are almost impossible to you know, to account for prior to doing this type of, you know, research. So basically the possibility is maybe those kids were already predisposed to have an aggressive response even before they saw the media messaging that they did. Who knows? And it's very hard to, you know, you can't get a group of human beings who are all going to be identical in order to test this out. So limited results there, but it did lead to a set of rules regarding you know, broadcasting to children, that the violence would be put into prime time or late prime time, but not, let's say, Saturday morning and stuff. So there was also work done on commercials, right? Because children were more susceptible to suggestion, to persuasion. They don't have those kind of critical faculties which would help them resist messaging. So there were limits based on the amount of advertisements you could do during kids' Saturday morning television programming at the time. And even, you know, the kind of claims that could be made in advertising in general, you can't show a product doing something that it really, can't do in any way. So those, that kind of research was created in order to respond to anxieties about what's happening to kids, what's TV doing to kids, and it was the Surgeon General, so it was government-funded research into that type of stuff, which led to legislation. It's on the same slide with this as well, because this is the same time at which media content regulations were solidified through court cases. So the FCC's authority to regulate content in broadcast media was already established from the Radio Act. But for a long time, it wasn't clear exactly where the lines were in terms of content. And we should have a date on the Carlin thing. I think it was in the, it's amazing that they left off the date. Let's just see here. We don't want to go for YouTube, but let's find out. I would say it's probably early 70s. Carlin.
Filthy words.
So the dirty words, let's try that. Yeah, why not? Go for that. There it is, 7 dirty words, 72. Okay, you can even see those words. There's video, tons of video of him doing the routine on YouTube. Probably all heard of Carlin, even if he's like kind of from another era, from my era. But what happened was basically, this is kind of a weird story, but nobody really knew what you could say or couldn't say. There was a broad definition about obscenity. So there's points 1, 2, and 3 there. Obscenity, this is the definition that the FCC was operating with. So, they had the authority to penalize content for being obscene or offensive. And this was the definition. Average person, contemporary community standards, work taken as a whole appeals to prurient interests. That means, too racy. Depict sexual conduct in patently offensive ways. So this would cover porn. Lacks serious literary, artistic, political, scientific value. So that was there because, they had repressed great works of literature because they had sexy scenes in them before. And this was to sort of leave the door open to that type of material. So they were working with that, but in terms of broadcasting, they didn't really have anything defined until Carlin in the 70s. What happened there was he had comedy albums, which, no one censors comedy albums, right? No one's in charge of policing content there. But it was played on the radio, Pacifica Radio, and it was played sometime in midday because the FCC had established that for indecent, they have varying degrees of what's indecent, what's offensive, what's obscene. They had determined that indecent content could be played from 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. because children weren't likely to be watching television at that time. So indecent content, well, here we go. Patently offensive, using community standards, descriptions of sexual or excretory activities or organs. So that was their definition of indecent, still is. You can do it from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. On Pacifica, they played a cut from Carlin's record of the 7 filthy words, and they played it like around noon. And 3 months later, somebody complained. This is literally, one person sent a letter to the FCC to complain about this. And they investigated, and they fined Pacifica. And Pacifica said, you don't have the right to fine us. This is suppressing our free speech, First Amendment rights. And this went back and forth, until it went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court finally decided, yes, the FCC does have the right to police this content. And at that point, the actual filthy words that Carlin used became the only real guideline we have of what you're not allowed to say on the media anyway. So incredible how that works out. But nobody in the 1930s sat there and wrote down a list of bad words that you couldn't say. It was up to Carlin to actually say them, and then a huge court battle in order to finally, decide that, okay, these things aren't allowed. And it's all based on the idea that, that saying those things could have such a powerful effect on the audience that we should really stop them from being said. So that's it. So those are indecent. As we go back to obscenity, just remember that you're not allowed to broadcast anything obscene at any time. Okay? So things like porn, things where you actually see sex acts and stuff like that, you can't put it on at any time. However, filthy words that merely reference descriptions or excretory activities or such, those are cool from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. But of course, on cable TV, you can do it anytime because the FCC doesn't have anything regarding that. But you're not allowed to broadcast anything obscene on any service. So that's there it goes. There it goes. There was also on a similar idea that media messages could be so powerful that we have to regulate them. Tipper Gore got upset about a Prince song, Darling Nikki. It had some lyrics that they didn't like. So they came up with a voluntary ratings scheme where they would put stickers on recordings to say, ooh, this one's got naughty words, this one says kill police, this one's, that kind of stuff. So that no longer exists. The Parents Music Resource Center has a labeling thing. I don't believe CDs are labeled at all anymore, but I might be wrong. Jenny?
How is this different than strong effects aside from the legislation?
It's a good point. So it is basically the legislators leaning on, how could I put it? Their background theory is that there are strong effects and that we should defend the population from those strong effects. And you'll notice that they're mostly combined to, well, not combined, a lot of the anxiety is around kids. And so it's kind of like all of a sudden when you reach 18, you should be able to deal with all this stuff. But they, basically we're operating with the idea that, kids are sort of incompetent at that age and that they are more susceptible to media effects. So they are strong effects, yeah, definitely. But I guess they exist on this other slide because, Congress got around to doing something in the 1960s about it. And again, they wouldn't reference any of the other theories that we were talking about, but just in the way that they're working, you can see that they were positing strong effects. Weird thing, when I read the textbook, I'd never heard of this, but a television show actually broadcast called The Great American Values Test, which literally had audiences filling in questionnaires and then watching a television show and then filling in another questionnaire afterwards. So, an attempt at a kind of a mass experiment where, with a lot of people involved. I had never heard about that in North America. In England, I had heard about some, not that type of research, but the government studying the population. But in this case, that blew me away. Mass observation studies. So I want to learn more about that. Okay, so that leads to the end of today. So next class, we'll talk about the current state of knowledge about some of these issues, television violence, and so on and so forth. Don't expect too much conclusive information. These are tough things to study. And I did queue up a Kahoot, and I haven't forgot. So next class, we'll have a double Kahoot. We'll have a Kahoot about movies, and we'll have a Kahoot about social science research. Okay?